The Big Noses by Terry Jones. There was once an island in the middle of the ocean where everyone's nose was far too big. The chief of the island got in a boat and sailed to the place where the wisest of all men lived. "Now, what is the problem?" asked the wisest of all men. "Well," said the chief of the island, "all my people are unhappy because their noses are too big. We can't get our sweaters over our heads because our noses are so big. We can't enjoy a drink without hitting our noses on the other side of the cup. We can't kiss each other because our noses get in the way. But worst of all, we don't even like each other because of our ugly, great noses. Can you help us by making our noses smaller?" "Well," said the wisest of all men, "I cannot make your noses smaller. Only the magician who lives by the burning lake could do that, and even he could not do it for all your people. But come back in 3 days' time, and perhaps I shall be able to help you." So the chief of the island stayed in that land for 2 days and 2 nights, and while he was there he went to the magician who lived by the burning lake, and the magician cast a spell over his nose and made it very small indeed. And on the 3rd day he went back to the wisest of all men and said, "Well, have you thought of an answer?" The wisest of all men looked at the island chief in amazement. Finally he said, "Is that really you?" And the chief said, "Yes, of course it is." And the wisest of all men said, "But what has happened to your nose?" So the chief of the island told him how he had been to the magician, and the wisest of all men shook his grey head and said, "You seek one solution for yourself and another for your people, and that's not good." "Well, it's too late now," replied the chief, "so what is your solution for my people?" "First," said the wisest of all men, "you must go to the volcano that lies on the other side of this land and take the ashes from its mouth and rub them into your hair and hands and all over your body. Then put on these robes and return to your people and tell them that you are Chantanda." The chief looked amazed and said, "But you are Chantanda, the wisest of all men. Why should I pretend to be you?" "You must," said Chantanda, "and believe me, you will thank me for it." So the chief took the clothes and Chantanda told him what he was to say to his people, and then he went to the volcano and climbed to the very top where the smoke and flames came billowing out of the ground, and he rubbed the ashes into his hair and hands and all over his body until he was a dusty grey colour, just like Chantanda himself. And he put on the clothes and sailed back to his people. When he arrived they all said, "Where is our chief?" And he replied as he had been instructed, "Your chief says he will not come back to this island until his people have become more reasonable." "What does he mean?" they all cried. "We may have big noses, but we're not fools. Tell him to come back." "He says he won't come back until you've changed some of your foolish ways," said the chief of the island. "What foolish ways?" they said. "What does he mean?" "For a start," he says, "you must stop sitting out in the rain playing Ludo." "But we like sitting out in the rain playing Ludo," they cried. "Secondly, you must stop using egg cups for your tea." "But we like drinking out of egg cups," they cried. "And thirdly, you must bend your heads to one side when you kiss." "But we've always kept them upright," they cried. "Otherwise your chief will never return," said the chief of the island. Well, they held a meeting and decided to do what was asked so that their leader would return. And before long they discovered that when they didn't sit out in the rain playing Ludo, their sweaters didn't shrink, and they were able to put them on over their heads without their noses getting in the way. And when they gave up drinking tea out of egg cups, they found that their noses no longer hit the other side. And when they bent their heads to one side, they could kiss just fine. Before long, they even started to like each other, and soon they were all living happily enough, and realised that there never had been anything wrong with their noses in the first place. But the chief of the island had to return to the wisest of all men, and get him to persuade the magician who lived by the burning lake to change his nose back to its proper size again, before he dared go home to his own people. The end.